Okay, so in keeping with what I think is now tradition, I'm seeing you're watching this as it's unfolding in real time. I've not seen this car yet, but I have just seen a presentation that was blow away.
The Rolls Royce Amethyst Drop Tail.
It's a real contemporary interpretation, isn't it?
It is. It is the only modern interpretation of the Roadster body style in the contemporary history of the marque. A very special car for us.
It's incredibly pure.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that was actually one of the guiding philosophies of the design, was to almost create this sort of distillation in terms of its expression, and also by way of form language. Stylistically is very, very different.
I've just had a glimmer of the interior is unbelievable. That rear three quarters, the sculpture's incredible.
Yeah.
It is almost a sort of future concept, but this is a real car.
It is. It's a fully road legal, drivable car that you could take out on the road tomorrow.
So how long have you been working on this for as a project?
So the first sketches were around 4.5 years ago, the very, very first ideas,
Really
and I would say the sort of principal idea of doing a two-seater roadster. And that was also the point then when these very, very first sketches were shared with some very special clients of ours, and yeah, in many ways we were sort of patronized or enabled to then create it. And since then we've had this remarkable journey with those individuals. The car that you see in front of you in the flesh
I've never
today.
seen a rear end like that. That is absolutely outstandingly stunning.
Yeah.
The sculpture, like the depth of it.
It is. I mean, the interior is really, a work of artistry, particularly the celebration of the materials, and the interior form itself was largely guided around the principle of actually nestling the occupant deep down within the car. And that's quite a revelation for us as a marque, because typically in a Rolls Royce you sit relatively high and you look out over the waist rail. So to sort of nestle them down beneath the waist rail and tuck them into this interior, and also this, we call it the shawl element, this wood that encircles and wraps the occupants and cossets them together with this central plinth, conjures up a very, very different attitude and impression when you're sat within the interior space.
Yes. Taking a step back then, in a minute, we'll touch on the significance of it being effectively a two-seater roadster Rolls Royce, words which I never thought would leave my mouth. If you can, give us some sort of an insight into the client journey. Obviously it's very client-led from the sort of seed of its being.
Yes.
Where do you start with something like this?
Well, it starts with an idea. Our contemporary movement of coach building is a commission model. So that is to say that the ideas and the cars that we build are conceived from, an idea on a piece of paper, quite literally, that we have the privileged opportunity to share with some very, very special clients very, very early in the ideation. And on the merit of that sketch and the accompanying explanation, the project is commissioned and it becomes a real thing.
If someone asked me to sketch, and I can't draw to save my life, but if they did, what the sort of front fascia design language of Rolls Royce would be in the next 20 years, it would look something like this.
Well,
it's beautifully contemporary but still iconic Rolls Royce.
Well, that's lovely to hear, because that is always, for me, the sort of confluence at Rolls Royce is this careful balance between acknowledging our history and acknowledging, the hallmarks of the brand, while also projecting a very bold impression of modernity. Our Pantheon grille, particularly in coupling with our iconic Spirit of Ecstasy, it's like day one in the design studio at Rolls Royce. Those are the two elements that you don't touch.
Right.
Creatively. It's kind of that sacrosanct, don't go anywhere near it.
Yes.
But with a coach build project, particularly with the significance of a two-seater roadster that breaks the modern convention of the brand, we almost felt creatively liberated to do something very, very different. So not only the sort of fared-in treatment of the upper temple element, but in particular, for the first time in the entire history of the brand, the grille veins themselves are actually kinked and broken here at the top, so they cantilever backwards. So the whole bonnet volume actually overshoots and cantilevers over the grille form itself. And what this does very intentionally is actually connect the deep set sockets of the headlamps across the front of the car, and with this heavy brow. So it projects almost this kind of concentrated, agile impression, not aggressive, but just sort of concentrated. And that in turn also exaggerates this proportion of width, which is quite different for us, because typically with a Rolls Royce you want to exaggerate height at the front, not necessarily width. And this is suited to the sort of two-seater nature of the car. And akin to that is also then the treatment in the lower area. So again, a first for us is actually to chamfer the lower corners of the grille itself. typically it's rectangular, and it's very suited to the more formal nature of our mainstay portfolio. But here, to have these chamfers together with the deep draw, it kind of conjures up the impression of a more functional aesthetic to the grille, and that's, in my opinion at least, very suited to the owner-driver nature of the concept.
The actual finish of the grille itself, if I'm right in thinking here, you've got a blend of brushed and polished leading edges.
Absolutely, which you wouldn't, as I learned, sensibly do. It's actually a practice that we've taken from horology, from watchmaking, but it's something that doesn't exist in the automotive world, because you tend to do it by way of components. So separate components to have separate finishes. So to achieve it on a single component, as you see here, prompts it to be produced only by hand. You can only achieve it by hand.
Right.
So you have the hand brushing together with the polished leading edges. And what you notice also within it is brushing is not entirely uniform. There is almost this sort of quality of the perfect imperfection. And there's an interesting anecdote there. When we showed an early sample to the commissioning client, they were very insistent that we maintain that element, because they wanted the impression to be that it was handmade. And this upper temple element alone is 1 week of hand brushing to create the impression that you see on that. One week, yes, it's remarkable. And also a lovely signature element, as I mentioned, it is the amethyst drop tail, which has a particular significance to the commissioning family. And the client wished for if you like, a nod to that in a very subtle and restrained way. And I think it's also a nice indication to the sensibility of the family that they wanted this very, very discreet element somewhere on the exterior, and we interpreted it by way of this coined element, which is a cut amethyst stone at the base of the silver Spirit of Ecstasy.
It's actual amethyst.
It's actual amethyst, and it
of course it is.
carries the inscription of the car's name, of course, and it's also very discreetly nestled somewhere in the interior, which I can show you as well.
That's actual amethyst.
Yeah, indeed.
Wow. So with this being a road legal homologated car,
that's right, yes.
What have been the challenges with creating things like this? Everything's a first, right?
Yep, everything's first, and of course it's handmade, and I know that's an often overused word in the modern world, but producing something by hand, particularly in this case to actually produce something even more contemporary and more modern, we associate something that's handmade actually with creating, historical impressions or historical looking design. Yes. Whereas here, this level of modernity, particularly the clarity in the surfaces, could only ever be achieved in producing it by hand. So it's been a real enabler in the project.
Outside of Black Badge, it's not typical that you would associate carbon fiber with Rolls Royce, and here it is in purple tinted glory.
Well, it is, but
it's fabulous.
There's a story there in itself. The client was particularly taken by the idea of creating a texture, not a visible construct, but at least acknowledging that it's there. So it is heavily tinted, and of course, varying depending on the light situation, you get a different level of read through. So as you see it here, it feels almost like a texture rather than a kind of over demonstration of composite material, let's say. So
in terms of a series then, I mean, I've been really fortunate to stand alongside yourself over the years. We've seen Boat Tail, we've seen Swept Tail, but it's important to state that this is its totally own new project. It's not a continuation of, this is a ground up, completely new project.
It absolutely is, and I think one of the things we always set out to achieve as a creative team is that the proposition, by way of its character, has to be starkly different from one to the other. A coach build project is a kind of, once in a lifetime meeting of this, a unique client, a unique moment in time with the people working on the project, and the result and the outcome should always be profoundly different. As you mentioned, Boat Tail, this very, very generously proportioned 4-seater open-top car that's almost the hedonist, compared to this, which is this more agile, slightly more compact in its proportion, 2-seater roadster, one off the back of the other. And that's really the joy of this as a movement for the brand, let's say.
When this project was started, and I'm assuming it's a blank sheet of paper.
Yes.
Was it initiated with a 2-seater roadster in mind, or was it, we want to do something special, let's see where this journey goes?
Quite, yeah. I mean, as a design team, of course, we always harbour ideas and ambitions, and the studio wall is always littered with doodles of differing concepts. And I would say the modern interpretation of the historic roadster body style has been something that, you know, we've long since thought about. And when there was this unique collective of clients, it was more along the lines of, you know, show me something I've never seen before. And that in turn, you know, allowed us to kind of, if you like, push those sketches under their noses and sort of say, well, you know, could you imagine something like this? And there in turn, you know, the project began.
What's the significance then of this tail theme? Boat tail, swept tail, now drop tail.
Yeah, it's a very important part also historically for us. So typically coach-built bodies have descriptors by way of their name. So the name actually gives an indication to the body type.
Right.
So that was the case obviously with the swept treatment of swept tail, the nautical influence at the rear of boat tail. And here with drop tail, quite literally, we wanted to create a dropping rear, you know, to have this very, very low impression towards the rear of the car. And for that to not just characterize its appearance, but also, you know, be its name as it was christened. But this also creating this low rear presented a huge technical challenge, and it's an interesting, you know, insight into the development. So this rear deck, this aft deck as you see it here, is not just an achingly beautiful piece of artistry, and it is the largest single piece of wood that's ever been produced here in Goodwood, believe it or not. Wow. It actually provides an aerodynamic function. The downforce for the car at speed, yes, the pressure we need over the rear axles is actually created by accelerating airflow over this space here. We knew it is a high performance car, we knew we needed downforce, but the last thing anybody wanted on a Rolls Royce was a kind of spoiler.
Sure.
So we were able to achieve it by this accelerating profile. But the interesting sort of juxtaposition of that is, on the one hand, we were working with our aerodynamicist with the digital analysis of what was the optimal profile, and on the other hand, we were working with the artisans in the woodshop to understand what was the limitation of the material to achieve the sculpture that we wanted. And at least in my experience, those two worlds have never met, and it was quite something. But for me, at least, you know, a very Rolls-Royce solution to a very common technical problem. Talking of which, here at the rear, the nautical influence continues, you know, as I described, the aft deck coming down through centerline, but you have this vast uninterrupted surface that's akin to the transom on a yacht. So you imagine the hull form of a yacht, you have this strong sweep rearwards towards centerline and taper, and then this truncation that creates this volume here. And that's exactly how we manage the conclusion of the car here by way of its volume and proportion. And it creates, similar to the front, a strong exaggeration of width, but also provides this uninterrupted canvas for the sort of placement of the tail lamps, which are almost jewel-like in their sort of application there in the rear area.
So external body panels, are these hand-formed? Are these aluminium?
The car structurally is a bit of an anomaly for us.
Okay.
And we had to step outside a little bit in terms of the technical comfort zone for the brand, because, as you know, as a marque, we have aluminium architecture as the sort of the backbone for all of our models also going forward. But in the early phases of the project, we knew we wanted to create a proportion that was a little bit more agile, a little bit more compact than is usual. So actually, instead of the space frame construct of aluminium, we adopted a monocoque methodology. So the car is actually a mixture of carbon fiber, steel, and aluminium. So it's completely unique in its architecture and really stands apart by way of its very genetics, let's say, from the mainstay portfolio.
Some parts of it are super technical and got so much depth and sculpture towards the rear. The side is beautifully pure.
Oh, it's lovely to hear you say it.
It really is. I mean, I'm not sure the camera's doing it justice. The size of this door, and yet it is just a subtle concave structure there, but it's so minimalist on the outside.
Well, absolutely. And to be honest with you know, as a designer working on the project, this for me is probably the most artful part of the entire execution of the car. Starting from the rear here, you know, we have the more conventional Rolls Royce body-sided section, although we work very carefully to actually lower the core highlight. So the highlight sits lower, and that actually pushes the car, and usually for a Rolls Royce, much lower onto its axles. What we then did is created this double movement where we take a trailing line off the front axle, and we then sweep it in quite aggressively, for Rolls Royce at least, in towards the rear edge of the door, and then it kicks back out. And where these two volumes intersect, you actually get this upsweeping line here, and in turn, this strong degree of sculpture in that lower area. And we're very familiar with Rolls Royces that they're sort of almost regal creatures, everything falls and tapers towards the rear. Whereas you'll notice with this car, there's a poise and a sort of agility on its axles. It's just slightly primed, in a very measured way. And that really comes from the sculpture and the treatment in the body side in particular. If the client is let's say, supporting and enabling the ideas, that gives you, all the permission you need to kind of step beyond the realms of, let's say, the normal conformities. And that's particularly special to coach build, I would say.
So when you're feeding back to the client, is it more about colors and trim rather than can you change that line? Can you change the physical structure of it?
My experience is that the clients are, their input into the project is their ambition, their sort of like almost restless sort of sense of creating something special, but it's never kind of, can you move that line 5 millimeters or can we change that? It's, as I mentioned earlier, as loose as I would like to see something I've never seen before.
That's really interesting. Would you classify the coach built program as a flagship offering from Rolls-Royce?
For us, it is the absolute pinnacle of the mark. It represents the very best of what we can accomplish at this moment in time. With everything that is available to us, the practice of craftsmanship, the practice of technology. It represents also by way of design the very, very best that we can achieve at a given moment. And therefore, for us at Rolls-Royce, it is the absolute pinnacle of the mark.
So if you were to take this as your flagship, it actually makes the brand feel quite young.
Yes,
it feels a younger car. And I find as a statement to the world that using all of your best tech, obviously heavily guided by the client, it feels the most contemporary version of a Rolls Royce that I've seen.
Dare I say it, it represents a strong sort of movement of youth also within the design team. At the moment, we're very fortunate. There is almost a sense of vigor, a sense of confidence about the brand that allows us to do things like this, that we can kind of step beyond and, dare I say it, almost move the modern perception of what the brand represents. And that's why coach building for me is so incredibly important, because it's so much more than just design. In creating these cars, we're creating something highly emotionally resonant, that's intellectually stimulating and at the end of the day is artful. And that is a hugely special thing to be a part of.
Yes. So come on, run us through the interior. I mean, you guys have done some interiors, but the depth and sculpture in this is, again, it looks, if I wasn't seeing it with my own eyes, I'd say this was your concept CAD. And you'd go, let's take some inspiration from that and make something similar.
Yeah.
This is real. This is actually, you've actually made it.
It is.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. I mean, as I mentioned also in the explanation earlier, the interior is sort of made up of, I would say, 3 key gestures. First and foremost is the line coming off the grille at the front, the temple, runs uninterrupted rearwards, and it actually then wraps around and encircles occupants, as if it's sort of cosseting them and pulling them forwards. And that in turn creates this shawl impression, which is then encircled with this wood application that almost looks like it was carved from solid. And as you saw earlier, every single leaf of veneer is carefully and individually selected to make sure that the grain of the wood is actually accentuating the curvature of the form itself as it comes around the corner. And then as it comes around the corner, it neatly returns to the 55-degree angles, which has kind of become a modern icon of the brand.
So you sort of touched on that as if you sort of do it day in, day out, but let's just set a little bit more context as to how long it took to achieve that.
Some fascinating anecdotes, but as I say, particularly also with the wood deck, every single leaf was chosen individually, and there were some great moments in the development where, together with our woodshop colleagues, we had all of the leaves laid out on the workbench, and myself and Sina, the color and material designer, are sort of at the top of a ladder looking down, kind of going, no, take that one out, that one doesn't quite match, no, that one's too vibrant. And somehow it's the sort of, at least that area, it's the kind of Mona Lisa of woodwork. It's an incredible thing, and it could never be replicated in exactly the same way that you see it here. And that's when, for me, it's really, becomes very, very artful.
So just from the wood application itself, are we talking months?
You're talking years.
Years?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, you're talking years.
Right.
The wood development in itself was 2.5 years of the 4.5 years that the project was running for.
2.5 years?
Yes.
For the application of the wood?
Absolutely. And it started, I mean, before you even get into the grain, what you'll notice here is that there is this lovely sand color to one of the grain threads within the wood itself.
Yes.
This was actually the kingpin creatively for the entire palette of the interior by way of color. So that was the first fixed point before everything else was defined.
So you started off with that light sandy sort of strata running through that grain, and that was one of the key elements of the overall theme of the car.
Yes, because there was multiple iterations basically to get exactly the right, I would say, structure to the wood that both the client and ourselves were looking for. We had multiple loops on that. There were up to 50 logs, if I remember correctly, that were reviewed and discounted.
You reviewed 50 logs?
50 logs to get as close to, because not only did we need the right color, but as I mentioned, we have a unique application across exterior and interior, so we have to make sure that the consistency is right all the way through the interior. And as you see here, it then becomes the perfect color match of the leather, and in turn, once the sand color was defined, then we worked on the complementing amethyst color, and that in turn also informed the exterior. And yeah, to complete the explanation on the interior, as I mentioned, this sort of encircling shawl panel. You then have this beautiful floating center plinth, which is a cantilevered element. Again, it works like with the waist rail to basically lower the occupants within the car. You feel like you're sitting lower than you would do in any other Rolls Royce that you may be familiar with. And in turn, it's just this beautiful elliptical sculpture plinth of wood that you almost looks like it's floating. Together with that, as the final element, you have this almost cabinet-like treatment to the instrument panel here at the front, which, as you can hopefully appreciate, is, let's say, a strong analog celebration. Any digital technology that is required, mainly for the purposes of convenience, is in there but is hidden. And even here, one of the main purposes of the floating plinth is that it conceals the multimedia interface when the car is stationary.
So the theory being that one day when it's on the Concours lawn in several decades' time, it will still be timeless. There's no interruption of period tech,
absolutely,
as it were.
Absolutely.
Speaking of timeless,
yes.
What masterpiece of horology have we this time round?
Yes. So you may have noticed, in some way, the sort of, I don't know, almost the spiritual heart of the car, the meeting of two very, very distinct passions that the client and the wider family share, which is, of course, motor cars and mainly Rolls Royce motor cars, I'm very happy to say, and beautiful, unique timepieces. And what was created here is a unique piece. It is a high complication piece by Vacheron Constantin by way of their Le Cabinier Haute Horology department, where we worked together over the last 2 years to define a piece that is extraordinarily beautiful in its, let's say, functional composition. And even, to be fair to our colleagues at Vacheron Constantin, they even pioneered new methods of anodization and new methods of brushing, as we touched on at the front, where we also have, with some of our bright work elements and stainless steel parts, this very, very fine brushing where we drew inspiration from their practices and their techniques. We also shared knowledge with them to come in line in terms of color and finish with a lot of the other elements within the car.
How fantastic. So you were very closely working together with them then?
Yes, yeah, very much so. But what is beautiful is, I would say, it's not a kind of constructed partnership. We were very authentically brought together by two passions that the client had. And I also was very fortunate to spend a lot of time together with them in the workshops in Geneva, understanding their discipline and influencing their design work, and in turn they also spent a lot of time with us in the studio to understand actually the wider car and how that could inform the work that they're doing as well.
That must have been a fantastic journey.
It's incredible, it's as a humble car designer, it's an amazing thing to be a part of, I have to say.
So in the corner then?
Yes.
Spotted a roof.
The second personality of the car, yes.
And again, I mean, sculpturally, look at this.
Yeah. It is transformational, at least in my opinion. And again, it was something that was sort of embedded into the project in the very early days, that we were not, let's say, satisfied with a beautiful open-top roadster in its own right, but the desire to create also this second personality when a roof is in place. And we all know, particularly with retractable roofs, they have this kind of common silhouette, and that was something that also the client's family were prepared to make, let's say, modest concessions in terms of practicality, to have a removable hardtop.
Yes.
But therefore, when the hardtop is on place, that you transform the car into this sort of low-slung and dramatic-looking coupe, and it really is transformational.
Wow. So being coach-built, being handmade, as it were, would I be right in thinking it's made here?
Yes, yeah, on this very spot actually. It's even, to be fair, even within the business, it's a bit of a closely guarded secret. This quiet corner of Goodwood, it's very, very purposefully tucked away. And not many people know what goes on in here. But no, it's on this very spot that the car was created, and it works, as you would expect with something that is built by hand. It's quite untypical in its construction, so it's a static build. Everything comes to the car, akin to how you would build a yacht, rather than the normal production line that you would expect a car to be assembled on.
So this is the amethyst drop tail.
Yes.
What's the significance of the amethyst?
Well, the amethyst stone actually has a particular significance for the commissioning family, in particular the eldest son. It's actually his birthstone.
Wow.
But they, as a family, are long-standing collectors of fine jewels. They probably have one of the most significant collections of gemstones, the world over. And therefore, amethyst was quite quickly established as a sort of point of influence, by way of not only the color palette, but as we touched on, also very discreetly placed within the exterior of the car, but also on the cabin as well. But the lighter sort of mauve silver that you see on the exterior was actually inspired by a flower, globe amaranth, a very, very specific flower that blooms in the homeland of the commissioning family. And we took inspiration from the color makeup of that flower, and that informed the general color direction of the lighter color that you see on the exterior.
I love how much story there is to your componentry. It's not just purple paint. There's a deep story to everything, which is awesome. So would I be right in thinking, and it's probably a distinct assumption on something like this, but everything is bespoke. That paint was nothing available from the Rolls Royce palette. It was developed for Drop Tail.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I hope as you stand in front of the car, you can appreciate that that's almost a given with everything that you see. It is entirely unique in its makeup, but also in terms of its form, of course. But coming back to your point about how it imbues narrative and how it tells a story, a very meaningful story, in almost a very restrained and kind of quiet way. I mean, quiet luxury is, an emergent thing at the moment, and it's something that we very much observe as Rolls-Royce designers. But we're always, I would say, consumed with this idea of how can we, in a very resonant way, sort of imbue story and the heritage of the commissioning family into elements of the car that doesn't overtly wear that,
Yes.
We're so far beyond, the typical monogramming and the typical sort of, as I say, obvious ways that you denote someone's personality, and we do it in a, I would say, much more meaningful way with a car like this.
So completely transformed.
Yes,
Completely transformed.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, as we were talking earlier, that we very much set out to create two very different characters with the silhouette of the car. One as the open-top roadster, but secondly with the fixed canopy in place, this low-slung and dramatic coupe. And here, there was a lot of pictures of kind of like 30s hot rods from the West Coast on the studio walls. These very, very generous, metal proportions to snug glass and kind of almost like pillar box appearances to the way that the glass house sits. And in particular, to get a lot of speed and drama to the line work of the roof line, and in particular here over the rear overhang, we studied quite a lot sort of nautical tenders where they have these cantilevered sunshades. But hopefully, as you recognize, it's highly unique in its aesthetic execution, and I think very well suited to such a special car.
It really has that marine tender-esque feel about it, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
But you're right, like the window line aperture is really tight.
It is, yes, yeah, and it's also on the limit. And we talked about homologation earlier. Your rear visibility angles, this is as small as you can get for this car.
Is it really?
And,
Wow.
you know, the relationship of
Okay.
the rear to the rear mirror and this width of opening, this is as much as you can get, basically. What was also quite fascinating is that the client, and again, it's unique to Coach Build, you know, the client was able to influence very early on our development, in the sense that with this particular execution, they want to use it for touring, and the wish was to not just look out, but also in the part of the world where they will use it, they also want to look up. Believe it or not, everything that you see here in the center is an uninterrupted panel of glass.
So from inside, that's transparent.
It's completely transparent, but moreover, it actually incorporates electrochromatic technology.
Wow.
The latest generation. So at the touch of a button, it can go from opaque to transparent, but not satisfied by that in itself. As you know, probably from current examples of electrochromatic glass, you get a heavy tinting, often blue,
Yes.
which was, of course, not fitting with the general hues and colors. So we embarked on a journey together with a specialist partner to develop, essentially, when the glass is opaque, it has the same amethyst hue as you see here on the exterior.
You're kidding.
And when it's transparent, it has the same sand hue as the interior leather.
Come off it, really?
Yes, yes, I say that very sincerely.
That might be the most definition of Rolls Royce I've ever heard.
Yes, and one of the big advantages of the fixed canopy, which we discussed with the client at the very beginning, is that the client wishes to use the car for touring and will travel long distances at high speed. The noise, vibration, the MVH levels that you get with a fixed canopy are akin to that of a fixed coupe rather than a drop head.
Right.
So you get actually a coupe and an open top car in one, together with this very, very different looking silhouette, which is, quite something, I think.
Boring question. Does it have a conventional boot?
It has, as I mentioned, the character is touring. There's some neat little bits here. So as you notice also on the exterior, there's this general pursuit of distillation. So we didn't wish to have any visible openings or switches for the trunk area. So the badge, our badge of honor for the first time in its history, is actually the actuator for the trunk. So if I press that.
It is. It's a mega boot.
It is, yes.
Wow.
So as I mentioned, it's for touring. So we actually even modified the bulkhead, the rear bulkhead, to maximize the literage.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, but again, this is also with a fixed canopy roof. If you have a retractable roof, you significantly compromise this area. But with this roof construct, we could achieve a very, very generous boot area, which is,
That's really substantial, isn't it?
It
Wow,
is.
and it follows around the very edge.
Yes, and that's the often overlooked part, is that all of the woodwork that you see within the car, it's real cabinet making because it has a proper material thickness to it. And if you look on the interior, all of the return edges have a draw on them, so they have a draft of wood. And this part in itself is incredibly hard to do, but that's also why your comment is so nice to hear, because when it is noticed and appreciated, particularly by people who understand that craft, it's all worthwhile somehow. Another interesting sort of anecdote from the client discussions was this notion that we had to distill the form as much as we possibly could to really celebrate the line work and the form work of the car itself. So conventionally on a Rolls Royce you would find an indicate repeater somewhere in here,
Right.
and also a Rolls Royce badge.
Yes.
You'll notice the indicator has actually been relocated into the door handle here. For a Rolls Royce first, the door lock itself is integrated into the handle, and the badge that you would conventionally found here, not even satisfied by just relocating it, we even deconstructed it to create a purer expression, and it sits here on these sail panels as a symbolic sort of recognition of the brand inside view. And of course these sail panels, which are really helping to denote visually that it is a two-seater. So the way the cabin is positioned together with the exterior volume, have the upsweep and then this uninterrupted trailing line that comes all the way to the trailing edge here, helps to, as I say, secure the impression that it's a two-seater concept.
Your what very little shut lines you have are incredibly tight.
Yes.
I'm not sure I've ever seen a shut line that tight, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
That is quite something.
Well, again, it's the advantage of a car being hand built, and to be honest, the only reason that shut line is there is actually for thermal expansion.
Is that right?
We don't
Really?
need it for the construction of the car. but we do need, particularly because it's a carbon construct in the rear, we do need some elements that allow a little bit of movement. Yeah, so that's the only reason it's actually there.
Does that keep you up at night?
It does.
Wow. Oh my God, the roof.
Yes, indeed.
That's absolutely incredible.
And if you press, this is the button here, so either one of them then allows it to change.
We'll allow it to.
So you imagine that through the Alps where you can enjoy the view, and then when the sun is at its highest, you can then close it off.
There is amethyst within the switchgear.
Well spotted.
What on earth? Look at this.
Yes. So yeah, as with the exterior, the client wished to have some sort of representation on the interior, but again, to do it in a very restrained and tasteful way. So it's actually a cabochon cut placed directly onto the rotary controllers there. So at first glance, you don't even notice it.
No.
But when you do, it's a rather nice touch.
Unbelievable. And is that's permanently fixed in there?
It is actually removable as a module. So the client's wish was for its, let's say, home to be in the car. And what is quite interesting is that quite late in the development, the client actually requested that we have a kind of cover to go over it when it's parked. So that was developed quite late, and there was a beautiful slim sleeve that allows you to basically place over the top of it and conceal it. And then it has a key which incorporates the Vacheron Constantin Maltese motif as the sort of the locking aspect. And yeah, it lives in the car, but you can remove it as a module, particularly for serviceability. But the client also commissioned a display case for his desk, where it can be situated.
This is just incredible.
Yeah.
Really, really stunning, isn't it?
You see particularly the texture and the richness of the calamander wood, especially in that area.
So I'm assuming this is obviously a very big part of your life. You've been working on it for 4 years?
Yeah, over 4 years actually, yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much.
I should say I've had 2 children at the time that we've done this.
Okay, right, that sets some context.
Gives some context.
That does set some context.
Yes,
wow, honestly, it's brilliant. Just congratulations to Rolls Royce, the whole team. And it'll be interesting to see if we see this thing out in the wild. It'll be very cool. So thank you, mate.
James, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure.